A fog-shrouded dawn in Eldorado. The shocking discovery. The morning of March 12, 2008, began like any other in the quiet, post-industrial town of Eldorado, nestled among stretches of cornfields and sleepy two-lane highways in southern Illinois. But that day, a dense, unseasonable fog had rolled in overnight, mingling with an insistent spring drizzle that soaked the cracked sidewalks and sheet metal roofs. The sky hung low and leaden, no birds sang, and the town's usual early morning bustle seemed drowned beneath a heavy, peculiar silence. John Carter, a retired factory worker in his late 60s, was part of a dwindling group of lifelong locals who still greeted the dawn from behind the handlebars of a battered Schwinn bicycle. Years before, Eldorado had boasted a bustling mining industry and the lively optimism of the Midwest. But now, many of its neighborhoods had fallen into neglect as families moved away and jobs disappeared. Still, Carter stubbornly stuck to his ritual, cycling through the outskirts, cutting through the ghostly silence of abandoned houses and overgrown lots, the chill air sharp in his lungs. On this particular morning, Carter's route took him along the southern edge of town, where the ground sloped gently down toward a fenced-off cluster of derelict homes left over from more prosperous days. The largest of these relics, a sprawling Victorian with a sagging wraparound porch and shattered windows, had been the subject of endless neighborhood rumor since it was auctioned off after foreclosure. Some whispered about strange lights at night. Others claimed it was a haven for drifters or a den for junkies. Most, like Carter, just ignored it, steering clear out of caution and habit. But as Carter pedaled closer to the old house, squinting through swirls of mist, a foul, unmistakable stench drifted on the breeze, a sickly sweet odor, strangely metallic, that seemed out of place even among the usual scents of mold and decaying wood. At first, he tried to dismiss it. Maybe a raccoon had crawled somewhere to die, or perhaps flooding in the basement had unearthed things best left buried. But this smell clawed at his nostrils, lingered, and grew sharper as he approached. His stomach twisted. Against his better judgment, Carter braked, letting his bike coast to a stop on the muddy curb. He listened. Somewhere in the damp quiet, a single unseen crow let out a harsh caw. He stepped off his bike, the tires sucking back into the mud, and gripped his old flashlight, a habit he never broke since losing his keys in the dark years before. Treading cautiously, heart hammering for reasons he couldn't explain, Carter pushed open the creaking rusty gate. Dandelions and wild grass brushed against his jeans. As he came closer to the porch, the nauseating odor intensified, a dense physical presence, like something rotten festering deep within the house's bones. For a split second, Carter thought to turn back. This wasn't his concern. But something in the oppressive silence nagged at him, some inner voice that whispered about responsibility, about what might happen if no one spoke up. He fished an old, prepaid cell phone out of his jacket pocket, grimacing at the thought of what his grandchildren would say about the outdated device, and dialed 911 with slow, careful fingers. The operator's voice crackled through the line, asking his location and the nature of the emergency. Carter's words came out shaky. "It's the old Hargrove house on Cherry Lane. There's something not right here. You need to send someone, please. There's a smell, like..." He trailed off, unwilling to say what he was really thinking. Like death. Within minutes after the call was placed, the first patrol car rolled up, its blue and red lights strobing eerily through the mist. Officer Linda Bentley, a young rookie only weeks on the job, was the first to arrive. She greeted Carter, mask ready, and took in the scene herself, her brows knitting in concern at the overwhelming smell, the way the weeds seemed pressed down, as if someone, or something, had been coming and going recently. She called in for backup and waited. The fog clung to the yard as more cruisers and an unmarked detective sedan arrived, tires crunching over gravel, radios buzzing with tension. A perimeter was established. The detectives, Ray Dawson, the unflappable veteran nearing retirement, Jessica Miles, methodical and haunted by too many unsolved cases, and Michael Wang, the tech-savvy forensics specialist, quietly snapping photos and logging details on his PDA, assembled their gear. Carter, shivering slightly on the sidewalk, watched as his quiet morning routine was transformed into the first act of a nightmare. The sun struggled to pierce through the clouds, turning the entire neighborhood a sickly, shadowless gray. The story, which would soon make headlines across the country, began not with screams, but with a humble, frightened man on a foggy Eldorado morning, who refused to ignore the unthinkable, and in doing so, set the wheels of justice in motion for 12 souls whose stories might otherwise have remained forever lost beneath the floorboards of a forgotten house. The nightmare. Beneath, inside the horror-filled basement. First clues. Emerge officers and detectives advanced across the warped porch, careful not to disturb potential evidence, the wood groaning beneath their weight. Flashlights swept over shattered window panes, graffiti-tagged siding, and mold-choked eaves. Every inch of the Hargrove house pulsed with an unsettling silence. Inside, the air was heavier, soured by years of neglect, but pierced by a stench that had nothing to do with damp drywall or old trash. This was raw, living, unmistakably biological, a scent that brought every cop in the room instantly alert. The team moved methodically through the ground floor. The living room was a graveyard of ruined furniture and broken bottles, yellowed curtains hanging like shrouds. Officer Bentley called out softly, the sound swallowed by the close, oppressive darkness. There were no immediate signs of struggle or forced entry, just the slow drip of water somewhere in the kitchen. Someone had left muddy shoe prints across the curled linoleum. Dawson's years of experience told him the answer would not be found upstairs. He looked for the central hallway. An old iron-ringed door stood half open at its end, let into the floor. The smell emanated from below, rising up out of darkness like something alive. Dawson steeled himself and led the way, as the team donned gloves and powered on body cams. The stairway to the basement was little more than a rotted wooden ladder, slick with moisture. As the detectives descended, every creak seemed to echo in the silence. Jessica Miles paused, her stomach flipping. She'd investigated too many cases with this kind of smell, and it always meant bodies. The beams of light revealed a narrow, low-ceilinged basement. The walls, brick, poorly patched with quick-drying cement, were mottled with sprawling black mold and what looked like old, rust-colored stains. One corner was webbed with cobwebs so thick they looked almost artificial. A tangle of extension cords snaked along the ceiling, leading to a few naked bulbs, one of which still flickered, barely functional, as if someone had recently tried to bring light to this pit. Then, the team went still. On the far wall near the floor, a series of desperate, ragged scratches marred the concrete. Letters gouged so deeply some were filled with dried blood. "Help me, and let me go," formed a chilling refrain, the handiwork of someone who had spent their final hours in terror and agony. As Miles swept her light across the filthy floor, Michael Wang called everyone over. "Here." In a matted corner, mostly hidden by a toppled set of metal shelves, was a length of heavy, rusted chain bolted to the wall. The other end held a shattered manacle, its locking mechanism stiff with black grime. Next to it, more stains in the shape of clotted footprints, smeared handprints, and a slick, congealed pool that could only be blood. Forensics would confirm this circumstance soon enough. Miles crouched, pointing out something embedded in the wall nearby. Human fingernails, torn away in the struggle, pressed like tragic fossils into the mortar. Next to these grisly relics was a crumpled sheet of notebook paper, stained with both ink and what appeared to be blood. Scrawled on it, In irregular, frantic script was a list of first names. She quickly sealed it in an evidence bag, her hands unnaturally steady for someone who felt her heart racing. The team fanned out. At the foot of an improvised wooden partition, they found a battered duffel bag containing torn clothing, shirts, shoes, a phone without a SIM card, and a tattered journal. The smell of human decomposition grew stronger near an old steamer trunk shoved against the wall. Its lock, brittle with rust, snapped open beneath the pry of a crowbar. Inside, horror. Bones, broken and interspersed with shredded denim and rotten sneaker soles, tumbled out. Some were charred, as if someone had tried, and failed, to destroy evidence of atrocities. Among the remains, a faded college ID card, a bundle of colored shoelaces, a driver's license with the photo all but worn away by moisture and mold. For the officers, it was clear. People had died here, many of them. Nearby, Miles noted scorch marks on the floor and wall. A reddish-brown handprint, unmistakably that of a small woman or adolescent, streaked across a dusty support beam. Further into the darkness, Wang photographed a crude calendar scratched into the wall. Vertical lines marked off days, sometimes as many as 30 in a row, each set terminating with a large X-shaped gash, as if the captive had finally given up hope. Detective Dawson methodically catalogued. There were multiple points of bondage and restraint. Bolts, more chains, a tangle of duct tape, even lengths of old green garden hose. In a milk crate, they found bottles of water, crumpled fast food wrappers, and a heap of prescription pill vials issued to various names. Someone had kept their victims alive, but not, alas, for long. As the team finished their preliminary sweep, they faced each other in grim realization. There would be days, weeks, even months of forensic cataloging ahead. DNA to match, names to check, stories to reconstruct. This place, hidden in plain sight beneath the very feet of everyday America, had become a chamber of slow-motion death. 12 lives disappeared here, every fragment of evidence whispering their terror in the dim, flickering light. And as a police photographer snapped his last shot of the morning, a close-up of bloody claw marks desperately raked across rough cinder block, it was clear. The Hargrove house was no longer a source of ghost stories for bored teenagers. It was now a headline, a crime scene whose secrets were only beginning to spill out into the waking world above. Victims identified, and a dark shadow emerges. The forensics team worked well into the next day and deep into the week, transforming the nightmare basement into a hive of activity. Swabs, bagged evidence, and coordinates called out for every grisly artifact. With each layer of dirt removed, another piece of the puzzle surfaced. News vans soon lined the rain-slick street above, but behind the caution tape, work was slow, methodical, and gut-wrenching. Identifying the lost, the notebook page that Detective Miles had found, splattered and soiled, became the linchpin. The names, 12 in total, were written in a variety of hands, some trembling, some faint, as if penned by people at the edge of hope. Samantha Hess, Laura Beck, Heather Lynn, Devin Lee, Paul Kaczmarek, Maggie Torres, Marcus Brown, Kelly Ross, Benji Duran, James Ridge, Caroline Hanley, T.J. Harper. Most went by first names only. Sometimes there were desperate little additions. Wants to go home. Please call my family. The task force set about cross-referencing these names with missing persons reports from the surrounding counties. It soon became clear that they'd stumbled onto something vastly larger than a lone assault or robbery gone wrong. Samantha Hess, 19, vanished after a Friday night shift at a nearby gas station. Heather Lynn, a 20-year-old student who'd missed her community college finals. Marcus Brown, a construction day laborer last seen at a soup kitchen just 4 blocks from the Hargrove house. Several had been reported as runaways, Some, heartbreakingly, had never made the news. Personal effects collected in the basement provided confirmation, and for families, much-needed closure. Maggie Torres's carved silver necklace, the one she'd received for her 16th birthday, was found clutched beside a shattered phone. Kelly Ross, a school registrar, was identified by her battered work ID, still strung on a faded purple lanyard. Each item prompted a flurry of calls to next of kin, each conversation measured and sorrowful. Not everyone matched a report. Some victims had simply slipped through the cracks, undocumented, estranged, or far from home. It was only now, as forensic anthropologists reconstructed jawlines and compared dental records, that their stories began to find daylight again. Unveiling the pattern. With the victim list growing clearer, Detective Ray Dawson spent long, sleepless nights at the division's fluorescent-lit incident room, piecing timelines together. The pattern staggered him. From late 2006 through winter of 2008, roughly every other month, a new name would join the town's growing pile of cold cases. Men and women, aged 17 to 42, with a diverse array of backgrounds but one commonality. They all vanished within a 10-mile radius, and, as officers now realized, likely at the hands of the same person. Dawson scattered the victims' photos and notes across a massive corkboard, drawing lines between them in red marker, tracking dates, last known whereabouts and oddities, missing shoes, erratic withdrawals at ATMs, or anxious voicemails left for friends. Sometimes there were days between a disappearance and a family's panicked 911 call. Sometimes, no one called at all. Jessica Miles, meanwhile, pored over interview records and digital footprints, determined to find connections. Did they know each other? Did someone lure them, or were they randomly snatched off the street in moments of vulnerability? From badly smudged fingerprints on a rusty doorknob to receipts for cheap vodka and rope at a local hardware store, every detail became another thread for the team to chase. One lead emerged from a series of parking tickets issued to cars abandoned near the Hargrove house, including a beat-up Buick registered to James Ridge. The vehicle had been impounded for months, its trunk still holding the spare tire, and a single dried-out bouquet of wildflowers, presumably meant for a date that James never met. These small tragedies built a narrative of carelessness, both by the killer in his arrogance and by systems that had allowed these disappearances to pass unnoticed for so long. A sinister presence. As the victim list grew, so did the sense that the killer was no ordinary monster. Dawson re-examined a battered composition notebook pulled from beneath a pile of ratty blankets. It wasn't just a macabre trophy, it was a diary, filled with scratchy handwriting and unsettling rants. Redemption through pain. Keep quiet. Nobody listening but me. They think they got me, but I'll always be watching. The phrase "nobody will ever care," repeated for entire pages, chilled the entire division. Further clues found in the basement cemented the notion of premeditation and control. The padlocks weren't amateur, they were hardware store grade and chosen to withstand bolt cutters. Windows were painted black from the inside, soundproofed with foam scrap and duct tape. Dawson recalled local rumors of someone buying up old mattresses and plywood at the salvage yard, and dispatched officers to question store clerks for anyone matching odd purchasing habits. Forensics located faint shoe prints, large, wide, and unusually heavy, impressing into dried pools splashed with lye and gasoline. It was possible the perpetrator was physically imposing, perhaps even overweight, given width-to-length ratios. His trophy-keeping instincts were obvious. Wrongly monogrammed handkerchiefs, ID cards, receipts, even locks of hair curled carefully inside glass baby food jars. The officer's skin crawled at the care and ceremony given to these souvenirs. Back at headquarters, FBI profiling units joined the case, offering experience from serial investigations across state lines. They cautioned that the man they sought had almost certainly killed before, perhaps even elsewhere. He was patient, methodical, likely employed somewhere that would not question odd hours or the smell of chemicals. He probably watched the news. He probably relished every minute the police spent chasing his shadow. Fear spreads across Eldorado. As the weeks wore on, local press picked up the story. The missing, formerly resigned to faded "Have you seen?" flyers in corner stores now had faces nightly on TV. The community responded with shock and raw paranoia. Parents imposed curfews. People installed new locks, suspicion coloring every interaction with a stranger. Despite the cold logic with which the investigation proceeded, it was impossible to ignore the emotion in every officer's face. Miles, who had once promised herself never to get involved, found herself quietly crying in the ladies' room, thinking of Maggie Torres's mother clutching her daughter's necklace. Dawson, always stoic, looked older than usual, the weight of 12 lost souls evident in the slouch of his shoulders. The list of the dead, once scattered and anonymous, was now assembled, honored, and mourned. And as a final subtle horror, a chilling idea began to take hold among the team. If not for a stubborn old man on a foggy morning, the killer might have added another name, perhaps many more, before he was stopped. A shadow without a face. Yet amid all the clues, DNA, handwriting, shoe prints, the chilling diary, no one, not even in the tightly knit Eldorado community, could say for certain who the killer was. Everyone now looked with suspicion at their neighbor. Shiftless drifters, a gruff handyman, an oddball who always seemed to walk his dog at night. The fat demon remained just that, a shadowy, nameless, and shapeless terror. But the net was tightening. Each victim had left a trace. Each piece of evidence narrowed the focus to someone real, someone out there, someone who believed they were smarter than everyone else. Unknown to him, the predator's time in the darkness was drawing to a close. The names on Jessica Miles's whiteboard became a rallying cry. 12 Americans, from every walk of life, whose lives were stolen and whose dignity demanded justice. And with every day, every lab result, every report and family interview, justice moved abruptly, inexorably closer. The relentless manhunt, the fat demon, and the race across state lines. Within days of matching the victims' list to regional missing persons cases, the investigation into the Eldorado basement murders exploded beyond the confines of sleepy Illinois. Ray Dawson's task force grew overnight as agents from the Illinois State Police and the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program filed into the Eldorado police station, armed with federal warrants, forensic specialists, and near-limitless resources. For the first time, it was clear. The killer they hunted was not only ruthless, but dangerously mobile. Suspect emerges. The fat demon gets a face. A database hit finally provided a suspect. Multiple town locals reported seeing a hulking, broad-shouldered man frequenting hardware stores and gas stations, always at odd hours, often wearing a baggy windbreaker, mechanic's boots, and a grimy Cubs ball cap pulled low. He was remembered less for what he said, hardly anything, than for his sheer size and blank, dead eyes. Cashiers nicknamed him the Fat Demon, or Big Ghoul. He'd paid for duct tape, lye, zip ties, bags of fast food, and bottles of cheap bourbon without so much as a grunt. Solid leads broke open when a clerk from Eldorado's only 24-hour convenience store recognized the grainy surveillance still distributed by police. She remembered the man buying industrial cleaning supplies and, crucially, a prepaid burner cell phone. The store's parking lot camera had captured his license plate, a battered white Ford van traced to a Robert Bobby Nash, a name that soon sent chills through every division's records room. Robert Nash, born 1968, had a violent past, a stint in state prison for aggravated assault and suspected in a string of petty abductions in the late 90s, although never formally charged. He drifted from job to job, handyman, mover, warehouse grunt, never employed anywhere long enough for people to remember his face for more than a season. Somewhere along the way, Nash had begun using aliases. His digital footprint was fleeting and patchy, but the van was registered in his real name, and the physical description matched witness reports perfectly. The chase begins, from Eldorado to Interstate 57. The flight was immediate. Nash, apparently tipped off by the sudden influx of police and media, vanished just hours before authorities raided his last known residence, a camper trailer behind a crumbling barn on the east side of town. In the trailer, detectives found a squalid living space littered with fast food wrappers, cigarette butts, and a carefully organized go-bag cache. Hundreds in small bills, fake IDs, prepaid cell phones, a loaded .38 revolver, and a map of the Midwest stained with coffee and sweat. Within 2 hours, Nash's van was spotted by a state trooper near a rest stop on Interstate 57, heading north at dawn. What followed was a cross-state pursuit, sprawling from truck stops and bus stations to the outskirts of industrial cities, farmland, and eventually the suburbs surrounding Chicago. Roadblocks were set up at major exits. Patrolmen pulled over every white van they saw, earning angry complaints from innocent drivers, but refusing to let up. A growing caravan of news vans tracked the chase. Soon the Fat Demon manhunt became a national headline. The entire region was urged to be on alert. Parents kept children home from school. Anonymous tips flooded the police lines, each report stirring hope, chaos, and more than a little fear among exhausted officers. Near misses and false trails, Nash's experience in evading the law showed itself. At a truck stop diner in Effingham, Illinois, security cameras caught his hulking figure slumping into a corner booth. But when a group of state troopers converged, he'd already left, taking a back exit, grabbing a waitress's jacket and hood to disguise himself. Another tip, from a gas station attendant near Bloomington, led officers to a rented storage unit. Inside, several pairs of muddy boots, a coil of chain, and another burner phone, switched off and tossed inside an empty oatmeal container. The forensics team scoured everything for traces, carefully bagging a strand of greasy black hair and a dog-eared Midwest construction flyer with fingerprints. Jessica Miles and FBI Special Agent Renee Powers mapped Nash's prior addresses, job stints, and shopping patterns on a giant color-coded board. Seasoned profilers asserted he would avoid big cities now. He needed the anonymity of the interstate, cheap motels, or maybe the kind of rundown industrial parks nobody patrolled at night. They pieced together his method: drive at night, sleep during the day, always keep moving. Several times, Nash doubled back, circling areas where his face had already been seen. Powers remarked grimly, "He's hunting for a place to disappear, or planning to die in a blaze." The fear that Nash would take new hostages or vanish for good made every report urgent. The psychological toll and growing desperation pressure mounted. The number of task force members ballooned as the hunt stretched into days. Ray Dawson worked 18-hour shifts, his face grizzled with fatigue. He dreaded the possibility that they would lose Nash in the vastness of America's highways, that another family would suffer. Another basement could become a grave. Inside the task force trailer, agents drank burnt coffee and pored over maps, reports, and call logs hour after hour. Tensions flared as leads fizzled out. Every missed opportunity weighed on their consciences. Meanwhile, Nash taunted police by making cryptic, chilling phone calls to media stations. Using payphones at Greyhound bus depots, he rasped, "You won't catch me. You never cared about the others. You don't care now." The calls were traced to locations already abandoned by the time SWAT teams arrived, but his message fueled public terror, especially as he seemed to allude to unfinished business. A break in the manhunt, the noose tightens outside. Chicago, after a week of false leads, a breakthrough finally came. A traffic cam captured the white Ford van exiting toward Joliet, a blue-collar suburb west of Chicago. Minutes later, a warehouse night watchman called in, reporting someone matching Nash's description lurking around storage sheds at the edge of the rail yards. This time, the net was ready. FBI, state troopers, and local police responded within moments. Officers formed a tight cordon, blocking off roads and alleyways, working their way through the shadows with guns drawn. Night fell, cold and raw, wind howling off the train tracks. The scene was illuminated by strobes of squad car lights, and harsh orders barked over radios. Dawson himself crept behind a line of derelict boxcars, shotgun at the ready. A dog barked, heels thudded against pavement. A figure lunged from behind a stack of pallets. Nash, heavier and slower than in the grainy surveillance clips, swung a crowbar wildly. He caught an officer with a glancing blow before being tackled hard by two troopers and pinned, grunting and roaring curses. The confrontation ended with Nash cuffed face down in a mud puddle, the tattooed demon on his arm glistening with rain and streetlights. "Gotcha, Bobby," Dawson said, relief and anger mixing in his voice. Even battle-hardened agents breathed shaky sighs of relief and disbelief. The monster who'd haunted so many dreams had finally run out of places to hide. Aftermath. Relief, mourning, and the unending echo news of the arrest spread in seconds. Eldorado and the country exhaled as one. In a battered warehouse parking lot, the fat demon's reign of terror ended with the sound of handcuffs scraping bone. For the families of the lost, the wait for justice had begun. For the task force and a scarred community, the long-haunted road to healing could finally start. Though no one would ever look at fog, or at lonely basements, the same way again. Unraveling a twisted past and the birth of a bloodthirsty motive. Now in custody, Robert Bobby Nash, the man branded by media as the Fat Demon, was no longer the elusive ghost haunting America's highways and hearts. Slumped in a steel chair at a Chicago interrogation room, eyes sunken and fingers swollen, he had become something both more ordinary and more menacing. A broken man, muttering, defiant and defiled, suddenly stripped of the shadows that had sheltered him for so long. Detective Ray Dawson knew the arrest was only half the battle. Now he needed to unearth what had created a killer capable of single-handedly destroying so many lives and frightening an entire region. The country was asking a burning question. What made Bobby Nash? Childhood in darkness. Investigators combed through Nash's old records, birth certificate, school files, juvenile offenses, hospital intake forms, even foster agency paperwork. Born in 1968 to an unstable household in Carbondale, Illinois, Nash was the son of a father who drank hard and a mother who came and went, like a ghost. Neighbors recalled Bobby staying up late, wandering the yards after dark, often sporting bruises and an unwashed face. Social services visited many times. From interviews, it was clear violence was entrenched in the Nash home. He spent multiple Christmases in the hospital, reportedly from falling down the stairs, though ER nurses suspected more. By 10, he'd gotten the habit of hiding alone in basements and crawl spaces, the only place where he felt safe from fists and slurred yelling. School was no sanctuary. Chubby, slow-moving, and with ill-fitting clothes, Bobby became a target for the cruel kids. Fat boy, demon eyes, they called him, taunting and mocking, pushing him face first into lockers or the mud outside. Teachers described him as strangely quiet, never raising his hand, but quick to anger. He would stare, unblinking, with a simmering intensity that made even adults uncomfortable. He failed to keep up academically, floated between classes, passed along mostly due to a lack of will on anyone's part to care. By age 15, Nash had run away more than once. A psychiatric evaluation from a crisis center in St. Louis listed signs of conduct disorder, antisocial tendencies, and expressed rage towards peers, flagged with a warning that he could pose a danger to himself or others. But the file, like so many in underfunded counties, vanished into bureaucracy. Bobby was bounced between relatives, foster homes, and even a facility for troubled youths. He returned at 18, heavier, withdrawn. His anger reined in only when it suited him. Early warning signs ignored adult life saw Nash drifting into the margins. He worked small-town jobs, janitor, mover, night shift warehouseman. His record was littered with petty thefts, bar fights, trespassing, and a sexual harassment complaint that went uninvestigated. Former co-workers said he was good with his hands, real strong, but you couldn't trust him with women or kids. Some remembered him staring at girls in the break room. Others later claimed he'd always talked about being invisible and loving the dark when you can do anything. It was in these lost years that Nash developed the control he'd never had as a boy. He learned how to move unnoticed, how one could steal just a little, enough to survive, never enough to provoke more than a stern warning. But darker tendencies simmered. Several rundown homes where he'd squatted were later found vandalized. Doors plastered with hate graffiti, crawl spaces filled with decaying animal carcasses, sometimes with words gouged into beams. Listen to me. Die quiet. The slide into violence. A turning point came in the mid-90s when Nash lived with a girlfriend on the outskirts of Joliet. Police were called repeatedly for fights, shouted threats, brandished kitchen knives, broken dishes, but neighbors declined to press formal charges. One neighbor remembered a night when the girlfriend, screaming, bolted into the yard, mouthing soundlessly for help before vanishing into the darkness. No charges were filed. The couple split. Nash, blaming the world, became more reclusive and dangerous. His first brush with real law enforcement scrutiny came in 1998, when a 16-year-old hitchhiker was found 3 towns over, traumatized and covered in bruises. She reported being picked up by a huge man with cold, dead eyes who drove her to an abandoned shack, threatened her, and left her tied up for hours. The man's identity was never confirmed, but notes from the investigation lingered. White van, greasy ball cap, heavy-set suspect. Nash, questioned once, supplied a shaky alibi. The trail ran cold, but the template was set. A motive takes shape. Back in present day, interrogators treaded the line between coaxing and confronting. Nash, sullen and hostile, at first offered little. Muted, he repeated, "You wouldn't get it." Nobody heard me. Nobody ever listened. When Ray Dawson finally brought out the diaries found in the basement, the scrawlings full of incoherent rage and terrifying clarity, Nash cracked, speaking in fits and starts. He described his victims as dirty, like me. In his twisted logic, the world was rotten and filled with forgotten souls just like himself, people nobody would miss. For Nash, the basement wasn't only a prison for others, but a place to reclaim the control that life and fate had ripped from him decades earlier. I wanted them to know what it's like, alone, nobody coming, no hope. They got to feel it, what I always did. The investigation unearthed more journals, letters to no one, saturated with bitterness. He wrote about his parents, the kids at school, frustrating jobs, and the noise in his head. He railed against welfare workers who smelled like bleach and wouldn't look you in the eye. There was a cyclical obsession, punishing the world for the pain it gave him, a lust for power drawn from the suffering of others. Professors in forensic psychology, called in by the FBI, categorized Nash as a textbook example of organized, socially incompetent serial predation. Dr. Karen LeClaire, who profiled infamous murderers in state cases, testified, "We see here a person whose psyche was built upon layers of profound neglect, systematic abuse, and repeated invalidation, yielding the combination of grandiosity and impotence which so often precedes predatory violence." To Bobby Nash, control over life and death was a way to finally become visible. A legacy of trauma. The ripple effect of Bobby Nash's crimes was enormous. Survivors and families gathered for trauma counseling. Support groups in southern Illinois launched public outreach campaigns for victims of childhood abuse, waving Nash's story as both warning and rallying cry. State lawmakers cited his case in drafting better background checks for foster and social service workers. Still, in private, many whispered that monsters like Nash weren't born, but built, if only someone along the way had truly listened or intervened. Yet, as the trial drew near, the ultimate accountability fell squarely on Bobby Nash. His past explained his rage, but could not forgive his actions. On the stand, he remained empty, muttering only the refrain, "It doesn't matter now." For Ray Dawson, and for the 12 families whose lives Nash had shattered, the answer to what made a killer proved as tragic as the crimes themselves. The story of the Fat Demon's bloody path was no longer a mystery, but a bleak diagram of pain, neglect, and the monstrous power of unchecked hate. But within Eldorado and across Illinois, the hope persisted that truth, however brutal, was better than silence. That in learning what made Bobby Nash, fewer children would be left to grow up in the darkness. Justice speaks. An American courtroom and the full truth unveiled. The capture of Robert Fat Demon Nash was just the beginning of Eldorado's reckoning. As the news frenzy faded, the country's attention shifted from the grisly scenes of the Hargrove house to the solemn, wood-paneled courtroom where Nash's fate would be decided. What followed was more than a trial. It was a national reckoning with evil, endurance, and the meaning of justice, American soil. The trial begins. The nation watches. 12 jurors and 4 alternates were chosen after one of the most exhaustive voir dire processes Saline County had ever seen. Television trucks formed a barricade outside the aging courthouse, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Everywhere, at local diners, in urban apartments, on the screens of late-night news, Americans watched as Bobby Nash was led into the courtroom in shackles, slumped and unsmiling, surrounded by armed deputies. Chief Judge Margaret Albright presided, her reputation for unshakable fairness known throughout the state. From the outset, she made it clear, this will not be a trial by media, but a trial by evidence. All the horror, all the loss, justice will answer it, not hysteria. Still, the collective anxiety was palpable. Families of the victims sat in the front rows, their faces etched with loss and hope, clutching rosaries, photographs, and each other's hands. The prosecution builds its case. Prosecutor Donald Carmichael, a veteran of capital cases, wasted no time. He rendered the facts stark and irrefutable. 12 murders, each calculated and sustained, each amplified by Nash's obsession with control and cruelty. Carmichael displayed crime scene photographs one by one, a latticework of chains, blood spatters like abstract art, battered evidence bags containing shirts and necklaces and ID cards. Cameras panned to the jury, whose faces betrayed shock, sometimes even tears. Forensic scientists confirmed, without a shadow of doubt, DNA from hair, blood, and skin cells recovered in the basement matched Nash's sample. Ballistics and tool mark experts matched the chains and manacles to purchases documented at Eldorado hardware stores, using receipts, surveillance video, and witness testimony to stitch together a narrative of chilling premeditation. One of Nash's burner phones, recovered from a storage unit near Joliet, contained morbid self-recordings, including audio of muffled screams followed by the killer's own rasp, repeating, "Nobody's coming." The prosecution's crescendo came through the testimony of survivors and relatives. Maggie Torres's mother described her daughter's last phone call and her years of unanswered questions. James Ridge's sister told of the bouquet found wilted in his trunk. The jury wept openly as one family recounted checking the missing persons database every month, never giving up hope, a hope now burdened with the weight of finality. The defense and the limits of sympathy. Court-appointed defense attorney Lisa Powell faced a task no lawyer could envy. She acknowledged the pain and loss, yet pleaded for her client's dignity, drawing on Nash's history of abuse and mental illness, childhood records, psychiatric reports, and the expert testimony of Dr. Karen LeClaire painted the portrait of a man warped by trauma, a captive of his own hell. But Carmichael rebutted with force. Hardship explains pain. It does not excuse monstrous evil. Nash planned, stalked, killed, and concealed, with a coldness that demands the gravest penalty. The prosecution also dismantled attempts to plead insanity. Psychiatric evaluations confirmed Nash's capacity to discern right from wrong, his lengthy confessions carefully crafted, and his every effort at concealment both methodical and chillingly effective. Nash himself spoke little during the proceedings. On the rare occasions he addressed the court, he either muttered cryptic lines, "They never listened, no one ever does," or fell into stony silence, hands twisting at his restraints. At one explosive moment, when shown the names of his victims, he finally looked up, not with remorse but with an empty, almost resentful glare. Witnesses, forensics, and the courtroom drama. The trial stretched over weeks, each day more emotionally draining than the last. The defense called social workers and psychologists, but their words struggled to balance the immensity of loss. In high drama came the testimony of Jessica Miles, the detective who had catalogued the whiteboard of the missing. Her voice wavered only once, recalling the bloody scratch marks and the found notebook page, then grew firm as she described the obligation to honor lives, not just collect bones. Media coverage was relentless. Victims' faces appeared nightly, remembered in montages for their birthdays, Little League photos, graduation caps, and youthful grins. Protesters gathered outside, some demanding the death penalty, others holding candles for lost children. The town of Eldorado, and much of America, lived in suspended grief and hope. Verdict and sentencing. The gavel falls after closing arguments, Carmichael's voice raw with outrage, Powell's cracked by exhaustion. The jury retired. Their deliberation stretched across 2 days, the air thick with anticipation and dread. At last, the verdict was read. Guilty, on all counts of murder, kidnapping, and criminal confinement. Days later came the sentencing hearing. Victims' families spoke, their pain rising in waves, refusing to become mere footnotes to violence. Marcus Brown's father, a preacher, told the courtroom, "Justice isn't only what we demand for our dead, but what we owe the living, never again to ignore darkness growing in our midst." Judge Albright, in measured tones but with unmistakable gravity, pronounced, "For crimes of this magnitude, premeditated, remorseless, and unspeakably cruel, this court sentences Robert Gordon Nash to death. Nash's only co-defendant, a shadowy acquaintance who bought supplies and helped cover Nash's flight, received a sentence of 20 years as an accessory. Closure, questions, and the echoes of Justice Kids in Eldorado returned to their classrooms. The Hargrove house was condemned, soon razed to make way for a garden planted in memory of the 12. The pocket of fear that once smothered the community was pierced. Safety, of a kind, returned, but innocence did not. In the aftermath, families and police and townsfolk struggled to process what had happened. Some victims' parents found community, supporting each other in lawsuits and legislation calling for missing person reforms. Detective Ray Dawson, his hair now fully silver, delivered lectures on the cost of indifference. Newspapers called the trial historic, not just for its scale, but for its refusal to let any victim be lost to silence or forgetfulness. Yet wounds lingered, trauma groups filled, some townsfolk moved away, and for years the name Nash was spoken only in whispers. Justice, in the eyes of the court and the country, had finally spoken. But for many, the verdict wasn't simply about punishment. It was an admission that American justice, at its finest, brings evil to light, and, however painfully, brings the truth home. Closing the blood-soaked file, haunting shadows and the lessons of America, the American justice system had rendered its verdict. The gavel's echo slowly faded from the courthouse walls. Yet in Eldorado, and across the nation, the story of the fat demon left scars no sentence could heal, and questions for which no courtroom could supply easy answers. As autumn leaves blanketed the reclaimed garden on Cherry Lane, and children dared walk past the site of the razed Hargrove house again, the community searched for meaning amid the wreckage of grief. A town remade by tragedy. It was not only the victims' families who bore the weight of the ordeal. In the weeks following Nash's conviction, Eldorado felt the dull ache of trauma beneath daily routines. Once neighbors had waved from porches, doors unlocked, and laughter carrying across yards. Now, locks were replaced, and porch lights flickered on at dusk, beams of defiance against the darkness. The town's annual fall festival, once a source of homegrown joy, took on a somber tone. Tables draped in black bunting, moments of silence before music or speeches, a new absence woven into what should have been celebration. At the local high school, students no longer joked about the haunted house down on Cherry. Teachers fielded hard questions in quiet, private moments. How did it happen here? And could it ever happen again? Guidance counselors, unaccustomed to such raw sorrow, found their rooms filled. Children mourned not only the lives lost, but their innocence, a sudden unwelcome understanding that evil was not a ghost story or the stuff of movies, but something that could move, breath, and kill right beneath their feet. The long work of healing recovery came slowly and unevenly. Tragedy visited some homes like a storm, sudden outbursts, lost tempers, weeping in the night. Others suffered in silence, withdrawing from communal life or drifting away altogether. Old houses listed for sale, moving vans rolling away before dawn. Yet many remained, determined to repair what the fat demon had broken. The garden planted where the Hargrove house once stood became a quiet monument. 12 granite stones, each inscribed with a name, circled a flowering dogwood. Townsfolk gathered there to pray or sit in silence, to touch a name, to remember. Some left offerings, folded notes, bracelets, photographs, even a baseball signed by a lost friend. On the first spring after the trial, a counselor organized a remembrance run, drawing families from across Illinois. A river of people in matching t-shirts, jogging and crying and smiling, reclaiming the ground with each stride. Detective Ray Dawson, grayer now and semi-retired, spent evenings tending the garden or talking gently with those who needed a listener. Officer Jessica Miles devoted herself to new cases and prevention work, bringing lessons learned to schools, shelters, and places the system had failed to reach before. Michael Wang, the forensics expert, quietly championed advances in missing persons technology, vowing never again to overlook the smallest scrap of overlooked data. A broader reckoning. If the horror of the fat demon left Eldorado more vulnerable, it also made the town a symbol. The case taught uncomfortable lessons that rippled far beyond county lines. State and federal officials cited the investigation when passing new laws, faster cross-agency coordination for disappearances, reforms in how adult runaways were processed, increased funding for trauma counselors and school psychologists. National networks covered the aftermath, airing interviews with survivors, detectives, and advocates calling for prevention over reaction. Debate simmered among Americans. Was Nash a product of evil, of neglect, of systemic failure, or some tangled combination? Letters to the editor filled local and state papers. some demanding more severe punishments, others urging society to see and heal its invisible children, those, like Nash, ground down by cruelty long before they became monsters. Church groups and secular organizations both ran support meetings, addressing issues as wide as childhood abuse, addiction, and the sometimes invisible ravages of trauma. Families who had never met the victims reached out, calls and emails from strangers in Texas, Oregon, and Maine. The garden received seeds and flowers by mail, each package a promise. Your pain is not alone. Your loss is shared. The story permanently changed how America looked at the missing and how communities understood danger not as a distant threat, but as something they had to recognize, confront, and prevent. Memory and vigilance. Even as healing began, the fear never fully vanished. Parents in Eldorado grew vigilant, teaching their children to trust instincts, to call for help, to resist the shame that had kept Nash's youngest victims silent. The local police held annual safety seminars and created an anonymous tip line, determined to act on the faintest rumor of wrongdoing. Trauma lingers long after headlines fade, but so does resilience. Survivors of other crimes wrote letters to the families, describing how they had lived and even found joy after tragedy. At the garden, a plaque bore the inscription, "Justice remembers, and so do we." Each year, the anniversary of the Hargrove house discovery brought crowds bearing candles and photos. What had started as horror became a ritual of unity and hope. The lessons America cannot forget. Perhaps the largest legacy of the Fat Demon case is a kind of vigilance, not the paranoid fear of outsiders, but an awareness of one another's pain. Social workers in Illinois, newly trained, now looked closer and asked tougher questions. Teachers sought out the shy, withdrawn kids. Neighbors talked to children wandering alone. The memory lingered. Monsters are not born in a vacuum. They are built through neglect, isolation, and indifference. Law enforcement itself changed. Departments began to pool missing persons data across jurisdictions, no longer letting cases languish for want of cooperation. Forensics units received better funding and improved connectivity, so that a broken locket or battered sneaker would be checked, cataloged, and flagged before it was too late. And for Eldorado, the lesson persisted. Justice cannot heal all wounds, but silence and forgetting guarantee more. To remember, names, faces, stories, the small and large signals of suffering, was an act of hope, a refusal to let the past dictate the future. Toward the light. As a new autumn settled in, Eldorado began again. Local kids played on Cherry Lane, the garden flourishing, the scars fading, never erased, only softened by time and effort. Detective Dawson, gazing over the blooming dogwood, sometimes felt a chill on the wind and sensed the weight of absence beside every flower. Yet he also heard laughter, saw friends holding hands, and knew that goodness survived even in the aftermath of evil. For America, as for Eldorado, the legacy of the Fat Demon was not only the pain he caused, but the courage of those who faced horror and demanded better. If horror haunted the quiet corners of the country, so too did the resolve to meet it with open eyes, and, in memory of the lost, unwavering light.